Welcome to CIHT Podcasts.
Today we look at global road safety. As the UN Decade of Action started in 2010 has concluded, where are we heading next for efforts to reduce those being killed or fatally injured on road networks across the world? Welcome to the CIHT podcast. Road safety is an urgent health and development matter. The number of deaths on the world's roads remains unacceptably high, with an estimated 1.35 million people killed each year. In addition, as many as 50 million people are injured. Road traffic crashes are the 8th leading cause of death globally for people of all ages and the leading cause of death for children and young adults aged between 5 and 29. Road traffic deaths and injuries shatter lives and throw families into poverty. On average, they cost countries about 3% of their GDP. So delighted to be joined by Matts Belin today to look at global efforts to improve road safety. Matts, could you just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background?
I work for the Swedish Transport Administration and I'm responsible for the Vision Zero Academy. I'm responsible for that. And I'm also have one foot in the academia. So I'm adjuncted as a professor at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And I've been deeply involved in road safety for many years now, and deeply involved, of course, with this Vision Zero. But I also have worked internationally. So I spent 1 year in Melbourne, in Australia, at the Monash University. Then after I worked for the World Health Organization between 2007 and 2009. And I also have been the chairman for the Road Safety Technical Committee in the World Road Association for one period.
And Sweden was a pioneer of Vision Zero, which was a paradigm shift in road safety thinking, away from traditional thinking about road safety to this idea of a safe systems approach. Could you explain what that means and why there was that shift?
Yeah, so as you said, it's more than 20 years ago now when the Swedish Parliament adopted Vision Zero as a new long-term goal. And I think that most people around the world, they recognize Vision Zero as a new kind of ethical imperative, that we can't accept that people get killed and serious injured when they travel from A to B. But for us who work with road safety, it's more than that. It's a paradigm shift. It's a new strategy to work with road safety. And just let me explain it a little bit more deeply and compare Vision Zero with a more traditional approach to road safety. In the traditional approach to road safety, the problem that you try to solve is a problem with accident. And we know from in-depth study that 90% of all crashes is due to human factors. And as a matter of fact, that is a kind of mantra, it's been there to lead us since we introduced the cars in our society. And I should say that have lead us, but maybe also mislead us, because we think that everything is connected to the human factors. So therefore, we have put the ultimately responsibility for safety is put on us as individual road users. So if something goes wrong out there, you can always find someone to blame for that accident or that crash. And our strategies has therefore been focused on try to creating a perfect human being who always doing the right thing through regulation, through enforcement, through education, and so on, And this strategy, this more traditional strategies, is also very much based on the idea that people don't want safety. So we have to come a little bit above and force people to behave in a certain way. And we don't think that we can really solve this problem. So we are quite happy if we can step by step reduce the risk. But although we are not so explicit about it, we think that there is a kind of optimum of fatalities and serious injuries. It's a kind of price that we have to pay for our mobility. So this is the the traditional way to think about road safety. And Vision Zero as a policy innovation is challenge all this aspect now. And the first thing is that it's not the accident per se that is the problem. The problem that we try to solve with Vision Zero is the problem that people get killed and serious injured. And the reason why people get killed and serious injuries is because people make mistake. We have young people, we have old people, we have all kind of people using our transport system. And instead of thinking that we can creating this perfect human being, we have to accommodate for that people will make mistake. And people are fragile. We have a certain tolerance against kinetic energy. And when we design our road transport system, this needs to be the base for how we design our road transport system. And let me take one example just to clarify the difference here between this more traditional approach and Vision Zero. If you have a typical 4-lane intersection and you have crashes in that intersection, the traditional approach to solve that problem is to put up a traffic light. And when you do that, the number of crashes will be reduced. But those who will happen will be very severe, because the typical scenario is that someone by mistake go against this red light, and due to the high speed, the outcome will be very severe. But if you make a roundabout, the number of crashes in that intersection might increase a little bit because it's a little bit more difficult to drive in a roundabout. But those who will happen will be less severe. And this traffic light or the roundabout might actually be the difference between life and death. And it's not you and I as individuals. We don't decide if it should be a traffic light or a roundabout. There is someone who have designed the system. So therefore, in a Vision Zero kind of framework, the ultimately responsibility for safety is put on us as system designers. And of course, the individual road users still have a responsibility, but when something goes wrong, it goes back to us as system designers. And just take another concrete example. If you take, for example, drink and driving, you know, Sweden have a long tradition to work with that problem. And already in 1940, the Swedish society introduced a certain threshold for how much alcohol you are allowed to have in your blood when you drive in the car. And it was actually the Swedish doctor who invented that method to measure the alcohol concentration in the blood. And in that time, we put the threshold on 0.8. And then during the years, we have lowered that threshold from 0.8 to 0.5. And now in Sweden is 0.2. And we have lots of information campaigns and that sort of thing. And we have also very dedicated police enforcement to work with this problem. And if the police go out and make random breath controls in the Swedish society now, you will find that 99.8% of the traffic is sober. And that is fantastic, you know. So we don't have any social norm problems when it comes to drink and driving. But when you make in-depth studies of fatal crashes, you will discover that 25% of all crashes is still alcohol related. So we don't have a social norm problem, but we still have a safety problem. So in a Vision Zero kind of framework, therefore, probably the most effective countermeasure for reducing alcohol-related crashes is a middle barrier. Because a middle barrier don't care if you are influenced by alcohol or drugs, or you're distracted, or you're doing something wrong. It will only prevent you from killing yourself or someone else. So that's number one, is a safe system actually for the drivers. And of course, we can't put up traffic middle barriers everywhere. So we have also been very active in Sweden to make sure that we have some kind of device in the cars, buses and trucks that prevent people from drinking driving, alcohol, some kind of device. So we think that in the future, you will have some kind of technology and it will be as common as the seat belts to prevent people for these. So Vision Zero become very much creating a system or technology that support the humans now to make the right decisions. And also Vision Zero is based on the idea that people want safety. When we creating a dialogue with people, when we talk with them about it, it can be parents, for example, kids way to school, for example, there is a huge demand for safety actually. And we as system designer, we have to take greater responsibility to deliver that to the user of the transport system. And we can see that there is a great demand actually for safety. And of course, in the long run, we would like to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries and creating a safe system. So that was actually what the Swedish Parliament decided in 1997. And of course, a policy is just a policy, it's a piece of paper. But fortunately, we have been able now to implement lots of new things based on this policy innovation. And when we started somewhere in late 90s, we had about 7 fatalities per 100,000 inhabitants. And now we have less than 2 fatalities per 100,000 inhabitants. So we have shown that even because Sweden, when we started this journey, we were already had one of the safest transport system, but we have shown that even a top performance country can reduce the number with more than 50%. So that's very good, I think.
And you mentioned people are fragile. There's obviously vulnerable road users in that mix. How does Vision Zero look to ensure that the system is safe for them in using transport systems? I'm thinking people walking and cycling, possibly thinking maybe in urban areas. How does Vision Zero and safe systems thinking apply in that environment?
So that was actually one of the first steps in Sweden. It was in the urban areas, and it's difficult with kinetic energy because we don't have the natural perception that there is something dangerous with speed. We can drive 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and as a driver, we don't have any problem with that. But if you look into fatal crashes, and we have seen that kind of research, that if you get hit by a car in 50 kilometers, the risk that you get killed is more than 80%. But if you get hit by a car in 30 kilometers, the risk is less than 10%. So it's a huge difference between 30 or 50, for example. But as an individual, you don't have this perception, So it's extremely important that those who design this system then take this into consideration, that people will not really understand these things with speed and safety. So you have to start to design your system according to that. So if you start to mix unprotected and protected road users, you have to put the unprotected road users safety as number one. And you can't just put a zebra crossing, for example, and then allow 50 kilometers. You have to make sure that the speed is not higher than 30 kilometers in those kind of conflict zones. So Vision Zero has actually challenged especially traffic engineers now in municipalities to start to design an urban area for the unprotected road user rather than for cars. And it's, you can see a huge difference if you go to a municipality in Sweden today and compare that with for, let's say, 30 years. So this is extremely important, and it become even more important now because we know that what we call active mobility, cycling, pedestrian, we also get e-scooters and all kinds of things, and we need that for other purposes. We need people to be more active because it's good from a health point of view. We need people to choose the cycling instead of cars because it's good from a climate perspective and so on. And if we everything else equal, and we put all these unprotected road users into the system, that is not good from a safety point of view. So we have to become even more proactive when it comes to the design from unprotected road user because we need it. And actually safety become one of the barriers now to things to happen because people understand that if I would like to get my kids to school and I want them to go by themselves, you are not stupid as parents. If you have to cross a street with 50 kilometers, for example, you know that this is not a good environment for my kids, So if you don't fix the safety, then it will have an impact also on the way that we use our system. So they go together, everything now. So we have to see it from a holistic perspective, I think.
And Sweden hosted, I think we'll look a bit more globally on this now. Sweden hosted last year, at the start of last year, just before COVID became a global pandemic, it was the Global Ministerial Conference on Road Safety, and that was in February last year. And that was kind of looking at the successes and lessons from the global plan for the Decade of Action on Road Safety, which ran from 2011 to 2020. Can you just tell me a bit about what came out of that conference?
Let me give a little bit more background to that conference. I used to say that there is a time before 2004 and a time after 2004, because 2004 was the first time ever in the history when the UN General Assembly discussed road traffic injuries in the world. And you have to remember that road traffic injuries is the 8th leading cause of death for all people. But it's the number 1 cause of death when it comes to young adults in the age of children and young adults in the age of 5 to 29 years. So it's a huge public health problem. But the global community, we haven't responded to that problem before 2004. 2004 was a very important milestone, and the global community start to work with this problem, and the World Health Organization, for example, they got the responsibility to start to coordinate road safety from an international perspective. They were set up a UN road safety collaboration, for example, with lots of different stakeholders and so on, and they start to moving things. The next important milestone step was when also the first time ever in history, it was a ministerial conference, a global ministerial conference on road traffic injuries in Russia, Moscow, in 2009. And the outcome from that conference was a decade of action. And these UN road safety stakeholders, together with the member state, they're creating a global plan for decade of action. And that is what we have been working with since 2010 until 2020. And then in 2015, it was the second global ministerial conference in Brazil, and it was a midterm conference. And parallel with that midterm conference, and a few years before, it was also a work with these sustainable development goals. And fortunately, road traffic injuries then become integrated into that framework with all these 17 different sustainable development goals. And it's very clear when it comes to health, for example, 3.6 talking about road traffic injuries, but also the goal 11, which talking about cities and so on. But road traffic injuries is definitely part of the whole framework. And then just before the pandemic broke out, we organized the third global ministerial conference in Stockholm in Sweden. And that was a very important conference because it was a kind of evaluation of how things going with this decade of action, the results of that decade of action. And it was also emphasized the next 10 years, a second decade of action, so to say.
And how did the first decade of action go? Was that considered a success?
It's a little bit mixed perspective on that, I think, because those when it started, the estimations was that if nothing will be done, then we will end up in an increase of fatalities and serious injuries in the world. It turned out that it was almost a stabilization of the number of fatalities in the world to 2020. So from that point of view, it was a good results. But according to the target that was adopted in the SDG framework, it was a failure because they talked about a 50% reduction until 2020, and that was not achieved. So from that point of view, it's both positive and negative reflection on the decade. The most important thing that was emphasized is that road traffic injuries is really now a part of the global agenda. It's part of the SDG and so on, and we have started to institutionalize road traffic injuries in the international level. But we have definitely a huge challenge for the future, I think, especially when it comes to low and middle income countries, of course.
On one level, there's changes with car technology, which obviously seatbelts, when they were introduced, there was a dramatic fall in people being killed or seriously injured as a kind of measure. And now we're looking to the future with autonomous vehicles. And where do you see the technology going in terms of improving safety, but also possibly that global inequalities within the kind of rollout of that progress, perhaps? Just thoughts on that would be interesting.
The whole change of technology now can be very important and can make a very interesting contribution to road safety. And I think that's the reason when we started to talk about Vision Zero in the mid-90s, it was more kind of vision, like something in the future somehow. But now, due to these technology advances since then we get more and more serious about creating a safe system, actually, in a kind of high-income country context, of course. But it's also have shown us that it's difficult, and we have to keep a system perspective on what we are doing. For example, in Sweden, Volvo and others carrying out full-scale demonstration project with self-driving cars in Gothenburg in Sweden. And when we started that project, it became quite obvious that part of the road network where we could allow this new phenomena was on the most safest part of our road network. So for me, it only shows that those who think that the road authorities and others or infrastructure holders, they can take it a little bit easy now and see what the technology will contribute, and the self-driving cars will take care of everything from a safety point of view. That's not the case. You have to have a system perspective on this sort of thing, and also when it comes to things like information and public information, we have security issues. There are lots of things that we need to discuss and work with to make a whole system to work, I think. But there is great opportunities here. But in the same time, it's very important that, for example, the safety community and others is part of this movement now, because it will not happen by itself. It's very important to have safety very high on the agenda when we're talking about this new technology. But it's very promising. But I don't think that from a safety point of view, we don't have to wait for a self-driving car. That's not the thing that will make different from a safety point of view. It's all this technology that needs to be in place to make a car self-driving. That is very good from a safety point of view. And some of them are already here. So we will be able to take advantages from everything that happened now from a safety point of view as a support system for the road user. Things like auto brake system, lane departure system, intelligent speed adaptation system, they will contribute to safety. So we don't have to wait for the self-driving cars from a safety point of view.
So as a final question, are you optimistic for the progress for the next decade of action in terms of global road safety, particularly, I think, in the low and middle income countries, the challenge that they face?
I think it needs a lots of work now, and it's a real challenge now, because what we see now that for example, is that we export some of the most bad cars that we have in the western part of industrial part of the world. We export it to those who are most vulnerable. I think there is a risk that they will do the same mistake that the other countries have done before, that they will focus very much on individual road user and make it they will define the road safety problem very traditionally. They will see it as an individual problem and education problem and regulation and police problem, instead of really make sure that when they develop their transport system now, that they integrate road safety from the beginning. And so that will be the challenge. But there is, in the same time, there are lots of promising things here, because due to the experience that country like UK or Sweden and others, all their experience that we have from the introduction of the cars in our societies and so on, all the knowledge that we have now, it's very important for others low and middle income countries now. We started to motorize and urbanize now to learn from those experiences, so they don't have to make the same mistakes that we have. Because even if we are very successful, I don't think that we should be too proud about what we have done, because it took awful long time for us to get where we are right now. And hopefully what you call it in English, leapfrogging. They can skip some of the mistakes that we have done. And I think that's why a policy like Vision Zero, that sounds very futuristic. It sounds like very much Sweden or Scandinavian or industrial. I think that kind of policies fits very well in a low and middle income country perspective, actually, because some of the principle that underpins that policy, I think that would be great if we could get these kind of ideas to put them on the top priority in these countries.
Well, thank you very much. That was an interview with Dr. Matts Belin. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.